I have a bit of confession to make before we get started today.
Oh boy. Okay, let's hear it.
So last Tuesday, I had one of those, those absolutely grueling, soul-crushing video
Oh
calls?
yeah, the ones that just drag on forever.
Exactly. It went on for like 2 hours. And the moment I finally clicked leave meeting, I mean, I didn't even think. I just walked straight into the kitchen, opened the pantry, and I ate an entire sleeve of Oreos.
A new tire sleeve.
An entire sleeve. I was practically standing in the dark, just, bathed in the glow of the refrigerator, staring at this random jar of pickles. And I genuinely had no idea how I got there. And the crazy part is, I wasn't even physically hungry.
It is such a profoundly universal human experience. I mean, you aren't actively thinking about fuel, you aren't planning a meal, and yet your body has seemingly just like engaged this autopilot sequence.
Yes.
And it leads directly to the highest calorie item in your house.
It's wild. And that is exactly what we are tearing apart today. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time fan, we are just so glad to welcome you, the learner, to the show today.
We really are.
Because we're taking a massive shortcut to understanding the fascinating and honestly deeply frustrating world of eating psychology.
It can be so frustrating.
Right. So we've gathered this towering stack of medical, psychological, and nutritional sources, and we're skipping all the dense jargon to just decode the signals your body is sending you about food. Okay, let's unpack this.
The mission for this deep dive is to get intensely practical. We are looking to clearly establish the fundamental differences between actual physical hunger and emotional eating.
Which, as my Oreo incident proves, is desperately needed.
Exactly. We want to show you how to accurately interpret what your body is actually trying to say, and most importantly, we're going to explore the neurological mechanisms behind stress-induced cravings so you can actually manage them.
So let's jump right into the biology. Because before we can even begin to identify what emotional eating is, we really need to understand what real biological hunger looks like under the hood.
Right, we have to establish the baseline.
Yeah. So I was going through the psychology research on hunger motivation, and it's fascinating how it all originates in this tiny, almond-sized structure in the brain called the hypothalamus.
Yeah, that little almond is essentially your body's master control center for energy. Because, people often think of the stomach as the hunger center, right?
Right, because that's where you feel it.
Exactly. But your stomach is really just a messenger. The hypothalamus is the thermostat.
Okay.
But instead of monitoring the temperature of the room, it's constantly monitoring your internal energy state. It's looking at glucose levels, fat stores, hormone concentrations.
And reading through the sources, it seems like this thermostat has two very distinct switches. I want to make sure I have the mechanism right here. There's the lateral hypothalamus, which acts as like the start eating button. Because if I'm understanding the clinical studies correctly, if you were to artificially stimulate this area in an animal, it would eat ravenously, even if it was already completely full.
Yeah, it creates this intense drive to seek fuel.
But if that area is damaged, the animal loses all interest in food and could literally starve, right?
That is correct. So that's the start system. Then on the flip side of that, you have the ventromedial hypothalamus, and this is the stop button.
The brakes.
Right. When it gets the right chemical signals, it tells your conscious mind, hey, we have enough energy on board, you can stop chewing now.
So the obvious question here is how this tiny almond actually knows when to flip those switches. I really like the way some of the nutritional literature broke down the hormone communication network.
The hormones are key here.
Yeah, and two of the biggest messengers are ghrelin and leptin. I actually, I have a car analogy for this that really helped me wrap my head around.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so ghrelin is produced primarily in an empty stomach. As your stomach empties out over a few hours, ghrelin levels rise sharply, and they travel through the bloodstream to the brain. In my mind, ghrelin is the low fuel light flashing on your dashboard.
I like that.
It's that physical urgency right before lunchtime when your stomach is actively growling, telling you to pull over at the nearest gas station.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it because ghrelin is an acute short-term signal.
Right.
And then you have leptin, which plays the total opposite role, but it doesn't come from the stomach. Leptin is produced by your fat cells.
Wait, fat cells produce hormones?
They do. As you eat and your body stores that energy, those fat cells release leptin, which travels up to the brain to signal that your long-term energy stores are adequate.
Okay, so following the car analogy, leptin is that automatic mechanical click you hear from the gas pump when the tank is completely full, physically shutting off the flow of fuel.
Yes. But here's where it gets tricky. This elegant biological system is highly vulnerable to modern disruption. The medical literature highlights a very common complication called hormone resistance.
Like insulin resistance.
Similar concept, but specifically leptin resistance. What happens is you might have plenty of stored energy, meaning your fat cells are pumping out massive amounts of leptin, just screaming, "We are full!" But the brain simply stops hearing the message.
Wait, how does the brain just stop hearing it? Does the signal get blocked somehow?
Well, chronically high levels of certain substances, like triglycerides in the bloodstream, can actually impede leptin from crossing the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, chronic inflammation can disrupt the leptin receptors in the hypothalamus itself. So the brain is just sitting there, totally isolated from the signal, looking at what it thinks is a biochemically empty dashboard.
Which means the low fuel light is flashing brilliantly in your mind, even though the tank in your body is completely full.
Precisely. The brain genuinely believes the body is starving. And this is a critical point to internalize. Weight management and eating behaviors, they are not simply a matter of weak willpower.
Right, it's way deeper than that.
You are dealing with powerful biological survival signals that can become dysregulated. It blurs the lines of physical hunger and makes the simple act of eating incredibly confusing.
Which brings us to the core dilemma for anyone listening right now. If our biological fuel gauge can be hijacked or ignored by inflammation or stress, how do we practically tell the difference between a physical need for food and an emotional want?
It's the million-dollar question.
Because when I was eating that sleeve of Oreos, it felt like a biological emergency.
It always feels like an emergency in the moment. But the clinical consensus points to 4 major physiological and behavioral differences between physical and emotional hunger. Let's break them down.
Let's do it.
The first is onset. Physical hunger is tied to the slow digestion of food, right? Therefore, it builds gradually over hours. Emotional hunger operates entirely differently. It is sudden, it is urgent, it hits you like a lightning bolt.
Right, like 1 minute you're answering an email and the next minute you feel like you absolutely must have a brownie or the world is going to end.
Exactly. The second difference is the physical origin of the sensation. Real physical hunger is somatic. You feel it below the neck.
In the stomach.
Right. There is rumbling, a hollow emptiness, a noticeable drop in physical energy, and eventually like shakiness or lightheadedness as your blood sugar drops. Emotional hunger, though, is felt entirely above the neck.
Above the neck, how do you mean?
It originates in the mind as this obsessive, looping thought, and in the mouth as a phantom craving for a very specific taste or texture. You don't feel it in your stomach.
Okay, and that leads right into the third difference, which is food preference. If you are genuinely physically hungry, the aperture of what sounds appealing is very wide.
Anything sounds good.
Yeah, an apple sounds great. A leftover turkey sandwich sounds amazing. But emotional hunger is hyper-specific. It is rarely a craving for, like, steamed broccoli. It is almost always a demand for something highly palatable, meaning high in sugar, fat, or salt.
And finally, the aftermath. Physical hunger responds to volume and calories. When the stomach stretches and nutrients hit the bloodstream, the hunger goes away. You feel satisfied and you move on with your day.
Makes sense.
But emotional eating leaves you feeling insatiable. You can consume thousands of calories and still feel a gaping void because you haven't actually addressed the underlying emotion. And crucially, it is almost always followed by an immediate wave of guilt or regret.
Oh, guilt is real. I've found a really fantastic tool for this in the psychological sources. They call it the chicken and vegetable test.
I love this one.
It's so good. Basically, if you are standing in front of the fridge, you force a pause and ask yourself, would I sit down and eat a full, plain meal of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables right now?
And what happens if you say no?
Well, if your internal response is disgust, and you only want the cookies, you are not physically hungry. Your body doesn't need fuel. Your brain needs comfort.
It's a brilliant diagnostic tool because it strips away the hyperpalatability of modern food. What's fascinating here is how emotional hunger operates strictly as a distraction.
A distraction from what?
From the emotion. It's a coping mechanism for feelings like boredom, loneliness, sadness, or most commonly anxiety and stress. It is a psychological response masquerading as a physiological need.
I really want to dig deeply into that mechanism, because if we fail the chicken and vegetable test, if we logically recognize that we are not physically hungry, why is the urge to eat that specific cookie still so incredibly powerful?
It's a very strong drive.
Yeah. What is stress actually doing on a chemical level to make us feel like we need sugar to survive a bad Tuesday?
Well, we have to look at how human biology evolved to handle threats. The physiological response to short-term stress is very different from chronic stress. In the short term, say, a predator jumps out of the bushes, your adrenal glands flood your system with epinephrine, or adrenaline. This triggers the fight-or-flight response. Interestingly, adrenaline actually shuts down your appetite.
Really? It shuts it down.
Yeah, your nervous system reallocates blood flow away from the digestive tract and into your muscles. Your body is basically saying, hey, digesting lunch is not a priority right now, running for your life is.
Right. Nobody stops for a snack while they're running from a bear.
Exactly. But modern stress isn't a bear. Modern stress is a relentless inbox, financial worries, a toxic boss, or, a 2-hour Zoom meeting.
Don't remind me.
When stress is persistent and inescapable like that, your body transitions from acute panic to long-term survival mode.
Yep.
It starts pumping out a different hormone, cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Right. And from an evolutionary standpoint, chronic stress usually meant a famine or a long winter was coming. So cortisol actively ramps up your motivation to eat and store energy.
And not just any energy. The literature specifically notes that cortisol, especially when it's combined with high insulin levels, creates intense cravings for high-fat, sugary foods.
Yes.
Because sugar provides instant, accessible glucose, and fat provides incredibly dense caloric storage. So your body is basically trying to armor itself against the impending famine that your stress levels are signaling.
But the truly insidious part is the chemical payoff. Once you ingest those highly palatable comfort foods, they literally create a feedback loop in your brain.
How so?
Eating sugar and fat releases a rush of serotonin and dopamine. These neurotransmitters actively dampen the stress-related responses in the amygdala. The food chemically acts as a mild tranquilizer.
Okay, wait. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If the cookie genuinely acts as a chemical tranquilizer and actually makes the stress response quiet down, why shouldn't we use it?
It's a fair question.
Right. I mean, it sounds like an incredibly effective, accessible tool for managing a bad day. Why is this a trap?
Because it is the equivalent of turning off the fire alarm while the house is still burning.
Oh, wow.
The blaring noise stops, so you feel a temporary sense of relief, but the actual threat is still destroying the living room. The food dampens the neurochemical stress response, but it does absolutely nothing to resolve the root cause of the stress. The toxic boss is still there. The stressful project is still due.
I see. So the tranquilizing effect wears off in, 20 minutes? The stress comes rushing back, but now you have a new problem.
Yes. You are left with the original unmanaged stress, compounded by the physical discomfort of overeating and that psychological shame we talked about earlier. Furthermore, through neuroplasticity, your brain wires that habit deeper every single time you do it.
It becomes automatic.
Exactly. Your brain learns that the absolute fastest way to soothe discomfort is food, which makes the urge stronger the next time you feel anxious.
And it isn't just internal stress driving this loop either. The psychological sources emphasize how incredibly vulnerable we are to environmental cues.
Oh, absolutely.
We are basically walking around getting classically conditioned all day. Think about Pavlov's dogs. We experience the exact same phenomena. Just smelling popcorn at a movie theater immediately makes you want to eat, even if you just had a huge dinner beforehand.
Because your brain has deeply paired the environment of the theater with the consumption of that specific food.
Right. And social cues are just as powerful. Behavioral studies show that people will eat up to 75% more when dining in a large group compared to eating alone.
75%? That's massive.
Isn't it? We unconsciously match the eating pace of the people around us. We sit at the table far longer, and the conversation acts as a distraction that completely overrides our internal satiety signals. So we are battling both our internal cortisol levels and an external environment that constantly tells us to consume.
Which brings us to the most important part of this deep dive. Knowing the biology, understanding the difference between the two types of hunger, and recognizing the massive impact of stress and conditioning, what do we actually do?
Yes, how do we interrupt this automated cycle?
The research points to a very practical tool to measure our internal state before we take a bite, the hunger and fullness scale.
Yes. This was one of my favorite takeaways.
This is one of the most powerful interventions you can use because it builds something called interoceptive awareness.
Interoceptive awareness.
Basically, the ability to perceive physical sensations inside your body. The medical community typically uses a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 is starving and 10 is painfully stuffed, and the goal of the scale isn't restriction.
Right, it's not a diet thing.
Exactly. The goal is to force a micropause between the stimulus and your response.
I love the analogy they use of turning down the car radio when you are lost and looking for a specific address.
Oh, that's a perfect way to look at it.
Yeah, you instinctively reach for the volume knob because you need to reduce the sensory input to focus your brain, right? So pausing to rate your hunger on a numerical scale forces you to mute the emotional noise of the day and actively listen to the physical broadcast your stomach is sending.
That is exactly what happens neurologically. You are shifting brain activity away from the emotional centers and into the analytical centers. So looking at the scale, the ideal time to start eating is when you are at a 4.
A 4.
This is defined as slightly hungry. At a 4, you are beginning to think about food, you feel a light physical urge in your stomach, but your cognitive function is perfectly intact. You can calmly decide to cook some chicken and broccoli.
I know from experience what happens if I ignore that 4 and keep working until I reach a 1 or a 2.
Oh, we all do. You enter the survival zone. At a 1 or a 2, you are famished, weak, irritable, and completely hangry. Your blood sugar is totally depleted.
And logic just goes out the window.
Literally. At this stage, your higher reasoning, the prefrontal cortex, essentially shuts down, and your lizard brain takes the wheel. You are practically guaranteeing a binge. Survival instincts will force you to bypass the vegetables and consume the highest calorie, fastest digesting food available as quickly as possible.
So starting at a 4 keeps us rational, and the scale says we should aim to stop eating at a 6.
Right, a 6 is defined as satisfied. Your physical hunger is completely gone, you are aware there's food in your stomach, but you feel light, nourished, and energized. If you push past that to an 8, 9, or 10, you cross into lethargy, bloating, and physical pain.
Let's put this into a real-world high-stress scenario, because this is where it gets tough.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's go back to my Tuesday. I finish the terrible Zoom call. I walk into the kitchen. I see the Oreos.
Yeah.
But this time, I force a pause. I check the scale, and I realize, okay, my stomach isn't rumbling. I'm actually at a 5, perfectly neutral.
Good step.
But my cortisol levels are still screaming, and the
Wow.
craving is intensely powerful. What are the actual mechanics of managing that moment without just relying on sheer willpower, which we know fails?
The clinical literature offers a sequence of interventions designed to break the behavioral loop. The first step is to literally break the environmental connection.
How do you mean?
If you usually stress eat standing up in the kitchen, you must leave the kitchen. Go to the bedroom, step out onto the porch. Changing your physical environment disrupts the automated behavioral script your brain is trying to run.
Okay. But what if the urge follows me to the porch?
Then you implement a delay tactic. Cravings are not permanent states. They are chemical waves. They peak and they subside, usually within 15 to 20 minutes.
So just wait it out.
Basically, tell yourself, I am allowed to have the Oreos, but I am going to drink a large glass of water and wait 20 minutes first.
Ah, I saw that. Why the water?
Because very often, thirst masquerades as hunger in the brain, and the water helps clarify the signal. But more importantly, the 20-minute delay forces you to ride out the crest of the neurochemical craving.
I noticed the sources also heavily emphasize distraction during that delay window. They suggest things like doing a crossword puzzle, walking the dog, or calling a friend. But, and I have to play devil's advocate here, when I am vibrating with work stress and staring down a craving, doing a crossword puzzle feels like an absolutely impossible, almost insulting suggestion.
It sounds incredibly trivial, I completely agree, but there is a profound neurological mechanism at play here.
Okay, explain that to me.
When you are fixated on a craving, your amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, is highly active. By forcing yourself to do a crossword puzzle or play a game of Tetris or call a friend and hold a conversation, you are forcing blood flow and electrical activity into your prefrontal cortex, which handles complex problem solving.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about keeping your hands busy. You are literally starving the craving of its neurological fuel by turning on a different part of your brain.
Exactly. You are forcing a cognitive override. But you are completely right that in the heat of a stress response, this is immensely difficult. Changing deeply ingrained neurological habits takes a lot of time.
It's definitely not an overnight fix.
No, it's not. And this is where professional frameworks like cognitive behavior therapy for eating disorders or CBTE and dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, become vital.
I see those acronyms everywhere, but how do they actually help in that specific moment in the kitchen?
Well, they don't just ask you to talk about your feelings. They teach specific skills, primarily something called distress tolerance.
Distress tolerance.
Right. It is the psychological ability to sit with an incredibly uncomfortable emotion like anxiety, boredom, or sadness without immediately reaching for a substance to numb it. It's the mental equivalent of holding your hand in a bucket of ice water and learning that while it hurts, it won't kill you and the feeling will eventually pass.
That reframes the entire struggle. It's not about never feeling the urge, it's about building the muscle to tolerate the urge.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic. What happens if I try the distraction, I wait the 20 minutes, I try to tolerate the distress, but the urge is simply too strong and I decide to eat the Oreos anyway? To me, and I think to most people listening, that feels like an absolute failure.
It absolutely does not have to be a failure. The ultimate goal here is mindful eating, which means de-automating the behavior.
Okay, what does that look like?
If you decide to eat the Oreos, but you put them on a plate, you sit down at the dining room table, you turn off your phone, and you pay deep, focused attention to the taste of every single bite and how your body feels as you consume them, that is a massive clinical victory.
Wait, really? Even though I ate the emotional food?
Yes, because you have taken a dark, unconscious autopilot behavior and dragged it into the light of conscious awareness. You didn't numb out, you stayed present. And conscious awareness is the absolute foundational requirement for any long-term behavioral change.
That takes so much of the shame right out of the equation. It's not about perfection, it's about staying present.
Precisely.
Well, let's look back at the journey we've taken today. We started by looking under the hood at our biological hardware, understanding how the hypothalamus balances ghrelin and leptin to drive physical hunger, and how that system can sometimes suffer from signal interference.
And we clearly defined the tangible symptoms that separate slow-building physical hunger originating in the stomach from sudden, hyperspecific emotional hunger originating in the mind.
We unpacked the evolutionary mismatch of how chronic cortisol literally rewires our brain chemistry to seek out high-fat, sugary foods, creating a feedback loop that masks our stress without actually solving it.
Right.
And we introduced the 1 to 10 hunger scale as a way to turn down the internal noise and check our physiological baseline.
And finally, we explore the actual neurological mechanisms behind practical delay tactics, the power of engaging the prefrontal cortex with a puzzle, and the importance of distress tolerance and mindful eating.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to toss it over to you for one final thought.
Yeah.
Because we spent this entire time talking about how to manage our internal responses and our personal habits. But there's a huge elephant in the room regarding the world we actually live in, right?
There is, and it's something I really hope everyone listening takes to heart today. Consider the modern environment. It is quite literally engineered in a lab to hijack the very ghrelin and leptin systems we've been discussing.
Yeah, that's so true.
We are surrounded 247 by highly palatable, ultra-processed foods that are specifically designed to bypass our natural satiety signals. We are constantly bombarded by targeted social media ads and ubiquitous environmental cues demanding that we consume.
We are essentially fighting millions of dollars of research and development every time we walk down a grocery aisle.
We are. So I leave you with this question. Is an episode of emotional eating really a personal moral failure or some tragic lack of willpower? Or is it simply your biology performing an entirely expected, highly conditioned response to a hyper-stimulating, aggressively stressful world? Perhaps treating ourselves with a little less shame, a little less guilt, and a lot more scientific curiosity is the real first step to regaining control.
Less shame, more scientific curiosity. I think that is exactly the reframe we all need. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you find yourself standing in front of the open fridge, bathed in that light, just force the pause. Take a breath. Check the scale. And gently ask yourself what your body is truly hungry for today.